Excellent. It's so nice to see so many of you here. Again, some familiar faces, some new faces. We have a really exciting program for you tonight, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have. My name is Mary Furlong-Minkoff. I'm the Assistant Director for Archaeology at James Madison's Montpelier and a board member of the Orange County African American Historical Society. And it's been my honor this year to coordinate the 2023 Juneteenth celebration. As part of our celebration this year, we've embraced the theme, celebrating stories of freedom. And we're really trying to focus on the idea of that freedom and emancipation wasn't just one day, and it didn't happen just in one place. So talking about how these ideas of freedom happened here in Virginia, and particularly here in Central Virginia, and the everyday acts that thousands of people took to reach that freedom. Today, we have a really exciting group of speakers talking about stories from our grandmothers. So this is the second in our virtual discussion series. And this one, we're going to have an exploration of the role of family stories in sharing journeys to freedom. Really dive into the importance of family histories and family stories. With us on our panel today is Joanne Brock. Joanne worked in Culpeper Regional Hospital for approximately 40 years. She retired about 14 years ago. And during these years, she cared for her parents when they were no longer able to care for themselves, and along with a few family members and many others in the community. Caregiving is her passion. Joanne has 2 sons, 5 grandchildren, and 6 great-grands. And since retirement, she remains actively involved with the Orange County African American Historical Society, where she is a board member. She's a member of the Montpelier Descendants Committee and a senior Medicare fraud organization. Joanne has attended the programs, the archaeology programs at Montpelier, where she loves to dig for artifacts, touching and feeling many of the objects that her ancestors made or used. Along with Joanne today, we have Jennifer Stacy. Jennifer is the daughter of Ada Coleman Monroe Saylor and the late Lafayette Raymond Saylor, granddaughter of the late Thomas Benton and Alida Cobbs Monroe, great-granddaughter of the late Thomas Benton and Lucy Wilson Monroe, Sr., and great-great-granddaughter of the late Edward Ned and Harriet Captain Monroe. She grew up in Belém, Virginia, about 10 miles from James Monroe's Highland, and currently lives in Locust Grove, Virginia. Jennifer serves as a senior budget analysis for the offices of the Secretary of the Budget in the Office of the Budget, for the Assistant Secretary of Financial Resources at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. She is a Partnership for Public Service Excellence in Government Fellows Program alumni and member of the Highland Descendants Council and William and Mary President Monroe's Highland Commission. So we're really excited to have you join us this year, Jennifer. Along with Jennifer and Joanne, we have Hannah Scruggs. She's a PhD candidate in African and African American Studies at Harvard. You may have heard of that university. She specializes in public history, and her current work examines enslaved and free Black communities in Central Virginia. She previously worked at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture as a genealogy reference assistant, and at the Montpelier Foundation as a research associate. And finally with us is Kiana Wilkerson. Kiana is the Descendant Research Associate for the Menokin Foundation. In this position, she researches and learns about the enslaved people that lived and labored at Menokin and the local Black community of Richmond County and the wider Northern Neck area. She also engages with present-day descendants of the enslaved people and plans events such as Descendants Day. She works closely with the Menokin Descendant Engagement Team and the growing Descendant Collective. Kiana graduated from the College of William and Mary with a bachelor's in history and anthropology in 2018, and from Virginia Tech with a master's in history and a certificate in public history in 2022. She also has experience in archaeology, archiving, cataloging, and processing, and used to be part of the archaeology team at Montpelier. So a little add to her bio there. But we are so excited to have you all here today, and I'm really excited about the conversation. For the audience, we are going to invite you to be active participants. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat at any time. We'll have about 10 minutes at the end of the program where you can either ask questions in the chat or you can raise your virtual hand and we can unmute you for you to ask. So if you have any questions during the program and you don't want to forget something, please feel free to add them to the chat and I will facilitate that for you. All right, well, we're going to get started with our official Q&A portion. And I just wanted to start with the idea of what we named this session. We named this session Stories from Our Grandmothers, because we wanted to talk about family history. And it sort of struck me as that was the name that seemed to fit, but also having a panel of all women here. So what do you all think is the role of women, particularly in keeping and sharing family stories? And whoever wants to go first can unmute themselves, or I'll call them.
So I'll go first. I like to tell the story that I probably wouldn't have gotten as far with my genealogy endeavors had I not had discussions with my grandmother. And I think that, and I compare that to the knowledge that I have about my dad. I had to do a lot more digging on my dad's side of the family because his mother died when he was 8. So I never had the opportunity to hang out with her. And I think women are, they know a lot, they talk a lot, they like to share. And that was certainly the case in my family. And had my grandmother not really talked in detail about her father's family and where they came from, I wouldn't have found them, because names come up and but you don't know that you actually hit your family on the census. And the way that I found my grandmother's family on the census is because she told me about all the neighbors. She gave me all their family names. And so when I thought I'd found my my great grandfather's family and him as a little boy, I went up the census and I found the names that my grandmother told me were their neighbors, and that was my confirmation. And without that, I probably would have just been digging around for a long time. And I think that's like that definitely sticks out in my mind as an example of how, the sharing of the stories helped to, to find our, our ancestors so many years later when the technology and the moment was right. And I think the other piece of that is, the wanting to share the stories, having the conversations. And I wonder sometimes if women didn't have a major role in naming their children, because that too helped to verify family, because the names were repeating. So I'll stop talking if somebody else.
I think that's wonderful. Would anybody else like to jump in or add to what Jennifer shared?
Jump in for a little bit. Oh,
go ahead. No, you go.
No. Go ahead.
Okay. The only thing I want to talk about is my grandmother. She was the matriarch of the family. She's demonstrated her love through time, talent, treasure, and we called her Grandma Georgia. We didn't talk about family history, but she just demonstrated her love. She would have family dinners and I just recall all of her members from the church, the pastors, the deacons, and family and friends, and everybody sitting around her big oval table in the dining room, white lace tablecloth and cloth napkins, fine china and silverware. So I remember those things, and I recall she would stand in the dining room in her apron, with her arms folded, waiting for the pastor to say grace. And us cousins and siblings, we were in the kitchen sitting at the table, and we were waiting till grace was said, no elbows on the table. So I have those memories. And we didn't eat until grace was finished. My grandmother, I could say a lot about her. We lived with her at night. We had to go to her house at night and spend the night with her so she wouldn't be alone. We sat by a big potbelly stove. I remember her cakes, and she would make these 4-layer cakes and these homemade peaches. So I recall those things. I wrote a 2-page documentary, and I'm too nervous to read it all, so I'm trying to go by memory. My grandmother, like I said, she just kept everybody together. She welcomed everybody into her home, whether you Black or white. We didn't learn about prejudice or anything like that. You know, they didn't instill that in us. She welcomed everybody in her home. So I have those memories. We grew up with responsibilities. Staying at my grandmother's house. I remember us bringing in wood for the kitchen stove, for the dining room stove, for us to stay warm at night. I remember us getting water from the well. We had a dipper, and that's the way we got our water in the dipper, and then put it in the glass and drink it that way. She washed clothes in a big old Ringer wash machine. And back then they used this stuff called bluing. You put it in with your sheets, and your sheets came out so nice and white. And I guess that's where I get a lot of my ways from. I wash my clothes and I put them on the line if the weather is nice. So I picked up some of my grandmother's traits, and that's enough about me right now.
I think that's great, because I think what you both highlighted was women, and particularly these matriarchs, as connectors, whether it's connected by bringing people together around the dinner table or making those connections to the past, of sharing those names and sharing the names of the neighbors. Kiana, I want to go to you because you had a thought.
Yeah, I had a thought, but it's not as eloquent as everyone else's. But I'm very much starting this whole research and genealogy process with my Nana on my father's side, my grandma on my mother on my father's side. And it's been interesting to just hear her talk about her life, because I think growing up, we didn't recognize it as family histories. We just was like, oh, Nana's just talking about the past. But now I'm old enough to learn all, everything about what was going on back then and with her life. So it's been interesting to like hear that her life story along with my grandfather's, and then her brothers and sisters. So I think just like women as storytellers, I think they're usually not as seen as storytellers. So it's just been interesting to see that, dynamic in my family, and how she is now the storyteller of the history. And that's kind of also the research that I'm doing with Menokin. Is also, we have a descendant that's basically the matriarch of one of the family members of the enslaved family. So her job is basically to like kind of tell us the history, which is a big it's a big job, and obviously she can't tell every single thing that happens, but her information and wealth of knowledge is so valuable into understanding what happens, what happened in the past with her family and everything.
Thank you. Hannah, do you want to expand or add to?
Sure, I can add. And just building off of what Kiana said about women not often being thought of as keepers of story. If we think about historians, I think oftentimes they're depicted as men, or thinking about even griots in the West African tradition are often men as well. But women are often in spaces, and especially Black women are often in spaces that are domestic, and they are listening and they're hearing stories and they're paying attention in these spaces, and get so much information and often know so much. And I think that that's really crucial in the role that women have historically played, and Black women have historically played as storytellers and keepers of story.
Yeah, I think they are the keepers of secrets as well, which there are a lot. And, during those times, I think there were lots of secrets that they kept. So sometimes they shared and sometimes they didn't. And I think that if my grandmother were alive today, I probably would know more of those types of secrets, because I would have been able to process them properly. But I wanted to add, Joanne reminded me of the memory of my grandmother's cooking for pastors as well. And Hannah, your granddad sat at our table many a times.
I think that's really amazing. So talking about the role of women as these keepers and sharers of stories, but also of secrets, I think is really important. But why are family stories important for us understanding the past or understanding history? I think so often we think of history as it has to be written down, but why are these family stories important? And I'm going to make you go first.
Amazing. I think a couple of reasons. One reason family stories are so important is because it allows us to understand the ways that our families fit into the past. If you think about the different stories that are passed down and you're learning larger histories in school from books, however you're learning them, podcasts, anyway, if you can understand where your family was and put your ancestors in those places and spaces, I think it gives you a better sense of the past. I think that that's definitely true for how I came to love history and love the work that we do. Um, and I was thinking about this today with my own grandmother, who was a volunteer and educator with anti-poverty programs during the 60s, during the Johnson administration, and went throughout her community and shared information about anti-poverty resources that were available for people in the area. And then thinking about war and poverty and thinking about these different social systems that were being put in place at that time, and understanding how my family was part of that. And then another thing that's so important, and speaking of secrets, sometimes it's important to share our family stories and our family histories and what happened, because sometimes as we're sort of seeing, not even sort of, as we're seeing now, there are histories that people don't want us to remember, and want to keep from us and want to keep from the public, and that puts us in a lot of danger. And so it's very important to have these family stories passed down and to be sharing them and to be remembering what happened so that it doesn't and it can't happen again.
Thank you. I'll go in reverse order. Kiana, why are these family stories so important?
Yeah, to add on what Hannah was saying about just like situating your family in the past, it just also gives them humanity. I think a lot of times that when we're reading these documents and these records, these court documents, that you lose that humanity aspect of it. And you're just like, these people, which I mean, for some people, I'm not saying for all, but it's nice to like have like, oh, they're a farmer in the census record, but what were they farming? Like kind of like what were they doing with the farming? How did they teach their children how to farm? Those sorts of stories really brings the life and humanity to your family. And as well, African Americans and Black folks are not readily seen in the archives. So this is the only way that we have history is through these like family stories, oral histories, and traditions. So that's just like two big things that I wanted to hit on about that.
Absolutely. Joanne, would you like to, why are these family stories important?
To me, they're important because I think about some of the things that I do, my actions, my involvement in things, and I wonder, where all of this is coming from, the curiosity. I'm always curious about something. I always want to know about the ancestors. But like I said, my grandmother didn't talk to us about it. Matter of fact, none of my family did. But it's important to me because I know that they went through struggles. And I can see myself today. I know that I can vote. And I'm pretty sure back then they didn't vote. They weren't able to. They didn't have the freedom that we have today. I remember years ago growing up, and we had the trailway bus come through Orange, come from North and come to Orange County. And they would meet us on the side of the road. We paid our ticket. When we got on the bus, we had to stand. Nobody offered us a seat. And I wonder, my grandmother, I never saw her get on the bus, but I often wonder, what did she do at that time? Probably just rode horse and buggy, I guess, I don't know. But like I said, the family history is important to me because right now I feel that I'm in the land of the free. I don't have hatred in me. I don't want to terrorize my country, so I could go on and on, but I'm getting a little nervous. But My grandmother, like I said, she was a strong woman. And I watched as she struggled trying to maintain the family together, you know. She would plant her garden, things that she did without even having a man present, because my grandfather died. I didn't know him. So she was the strong person in the family. I mean, my grandmother was out cutting wood, you know, to have in the house for us to stay warm. She was just an humble person. I remember her going to church with her white gloves and just humming in church. And I find myself doing that now, not wearing gloves, but I do a lot of humming. And so the things that they did back in those days, I cherished them. You know, I really cherished them because they were just humble people. They didn't create violence, you know, they just have love for everybody. So I think that's why I go to Montpelier a lot, you know, visiting the ancestors and finding artifacts and touching some of the things that I know that they have touched or they've made with their own hands, you know, to the sweat of their brow. And all those things mean a lot to me. You know, I get emotional thinking about it. If I'm digging and I find a piece of a nail, and I know that they touched that nail, they did something with that nail, it's very emotional. And I remember when I found the cufflink, and it was a picture of a person inside, and come find out that Montpelier had found a match to it maybe a year prior to it. And mine was found in the slave's kitchen. So all those things are emotional to me, you know. Yeah.
So I think you just demonstrated why family stories are so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jennifer, would you like to pick up on that, or?
I you know, the main reason for the stories being important is because, I mean, they weren't being recorded. They weren't being, you know, they were not being added to anybody's history. So what other way was there to pass it down but orally? So, and the fact that they did, it's just a testament to the fact that they knew how important it was for you to know where you came from, for you to know and remember the love. And they may not have had the eloquence to describe it like a history book, or maybe didn't get it exactly right every time, but it was their way of letting us know, you know, this is who we are. It's not who they say we are. This is who we are. And you're more than the descendants of slaves. You're my family. You're a human being. You are loved. And you know, and I think that, you know, maybe during my grandmother's time here, I think that there was, I think Joanne has talked about the fact that her family didn't really talk a lot about, you know, slavery and pass that part of the story down. I knew, but my grandmother didn't talk about it. My grandparents didn't talk about it a lot either. But I think, you know, I think it was before they realized just, you know, the resiliency and the fact that we're here today and they survived the atrocities of slavery. That's just, that's something to be proud of. And I don't think my grandparents had gotten to that place where they really thought of it in those terms, but that's all I have to say.
I think that's really important. And I think you set us up really beautifully for what I wanted to kind of bring up as our next topic of discussion. So we centered this year's celebration around this idea of celebrating stories of freedom. And I wanted us to think about freedom beyond sort of the typical Juneteenth story. So we know that Juneteenth is a holiday that marks the day where the general read out a piece of paper in Galveston, Texas and said, "You're free now." But we also know that every day over hundreds of years, people, and particularly African Americans and Black people living in this country, worked towards their freedom in everyday acts and in small acts, both before legal emancipation and after legal emancipation. So I was wondering if any of you all would be willing to share a story, either from your families or from your research, about how folks in Virginia worked towards their freedom of themselves or of their family members. And I will make Jennifer go first.
Two things, I mean, actually a few things come to mind, but my grandfather, and well, my great-great-grandfather Ned, who was a slave, he ended up securing 50 some acres in Albemarle County that's still in our family to this day. And that was his way of, that was his freedom. And he was even a forward thinker, because I've even seen the will that he executed with his ex on it, being very prescriptive about how that land is to stay in our family and not be sold, and who has access and who has the rights. And that you can't get any I mean, in my opinion, as a next slave, you can't get any closer to having your own piece of freedom. And he protected that land, loved it, worked it, and taught his family how to do the same. And my grandfather, he secured land very close there, 14 acres that we still have in our family, and that he taught us to love and to work. And so, and there are other, and then I had there are a lot of stories, but the other one that comes to mind is a great uncle that actually, after he was freed, he ended up going and joining the military and, serving his country. And that was his freedom to do that. And he did it. And it's just a wonderful story that I won't go into, but it's just, just of his courage and his determination. And, and he was free to make the choice to join, and he was free to make the decision to, to serve his country and to make some of the sacrifices that he made. But these are acts of freedom, and that come to mind from, I guess, emancipation and shortly after.
Amazing. That's amazing that land is still in your family, and what a testament to your ancestors to make sure that so many generations were taken care of. That's really powerful. Hannah, what about you?
Yes. So going before the end of the Civil War, one side of my paternal grandmother's family was free, and they were free because the first ancestor, well, one of the first ancestors I can trace, named Jesse Wood, was a patriot, a Black patriot, and fought in the American Revolution, and lived as part of a free Black community in Fluvanna, where I'm from and where I grew up. And so I think about that a lot, and the ways that during a very unfree time, that part of the family had some measure of freedom. It's still not what we would, I don't know if we reach freedom or what we think of as freedom, but they had some measure of freedom and land. And we didn't learn that story as something that was passed down orally, but we did learn it through research. And I think that is, the role of learning more about your family, is that you can also learn these other stories too.
It's amazing. Kiana, what about you? Stories of freedom.
So I have two. One is related to work. So we do know of two enslaved people who self-liberated during the Civil War time in the area. It was a big, in the 1863, in the Northern Neck. Basically, the Union Army had gotten as far down as Fredericksburg, I believe. And so the Northern Neck is probably like 15 minutes by car. But so you have to think of that, how it would have been actually running away. So two men around the age of, we think the youngest was 16, while the oldest was around 21. So just the idea of freedom and being like, this is my time to leave, and go. But one, Daniel Gordon eventually returns to Menokin, that area, and kind of builds his family, and eventually they all spread out. So just thinking about that, like leaving but eventually returning, because we're not really sure what happens during this 2 to 3 years he's gone. We're not sure if he joined the Union Army, or he moved, was he returned back? But just the idea that he did take that step to free himself is just like, just amazing to think about, like having that strength to do that, especially when he had his family still living in the area. Second thing is that a little further down from post-emancipation, but thinking about like financial freedom and how my great-grandparents set up my grandparents to help my parents able to get education to set me up. So now I have all this education, no money though, all this education. But like just having that financial freedom is like immensely important, especially in the African American and Black community.
And the educational freedom too. I think those are both really important components. Joanne, any stories of freedom in your family?
The only, I really don't know anything much about my family. I can say that the house where I'm living now, this was my father's home, my aunt and the rest of their siblings. This was the family homes, and my daddy was born in 1917. So they've had this property for many years. So like I said, I remember the home place here. 2-story house with a tin roof, the swinging on the front porch. Those are things that I recall. The big oak trees in the yard. Just a lot of memories like that. But as far as going all the way back, I have no recollection. We still have our family cemetery. And I understand there's a lot of graves there. So I'm still learning. I'm in the learning process. I'm reaching out for someone at my peers to give me a hand to help me. So, yeah.
Gotcha.
That's all I can tell you.
Well, I think this is all really amazing. I think what each of you has demonstrated is how important these stories are, how connecting they are, and in some ways universal, but incredibly specific to this area, to these families, and to the individuals you all have been talking about. And I think as we share these stories, and we're doing an amazing job sharing them and recording them, but what do we want the next generation to know? So what do we want these Gen Zs or Gen Alpha or whatever the next generation is that is coming behind us? What do we want them to know about how to engage with family stories, or about family stories, their importance? What is it that we want that next generation to know about? And I am actually going to go to Kiana. I'm going to go to you first, because I think you're actually our youngest panelist. So
No.
Yeah. Usually for these questions, everyone does look to me in the room because they're like, so what do the young people think? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm not that young. But I definitely think this is kind of to the older side of the audience, but like telling the stories very early on, getting the younger people engaged is important. I know that sometimes in the Black community, we were just talking about secrets and how people don't share secrets even when they're on their deathbed. So just starting to tell these stories, maybe not tell all the secrets that the family has, but starting at a very young age to be like, hey, this is how we got this land, or this is how we were connected to this place, is so super important. I think that established interest in family and history in the younger generation. At least it did for me. So that's it that I have right now.
all right. Well, I won't make everyone go in age order, but Joanne, what do you want the next generation to know?
I would like for the next generation to embrace our, excuse me, embrace our heritage. Be proud of who you are and strive to do the best you can, not carry hatred and malice in your heart. Because it's not going to get you anywhere. You know, we all bleed the same blood. still running our veins the same way. So yeah, to embrace our heritage and know that our ancestors, they fought hard to obtain what they had, what they've gotten. They fought hard. They worked hard. They strived. Before my grandmother, their children were the slaves, their children were taken from them. They had to do hard labor out in the fields all day. They didn't have any say-so over their lives. They had to do what the master required of them. So I say to the young generation today to embrace it, be proud of who you are. Don't carry hatred in you, because they paved the way for us. So we need to push forward and do the same to show the next generation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Jennifer.
One of the things that we're very mindful of is just making sure they're engaged, even with the work that we're doing at Highland. We took a trip to Casabianca, Florida, to connect with some of the families that were sold from James Monroe's Highland down to Casabianca Plantation. And two of my youngest nephews, they made the trip with us, and they sat through the whole thing, listened, engaged, and I think it was eye-opening for them. But the point of it was so that they would remember and be able to teach their children and pass it on. And between that and making sure, it's a cliche, but leaving the next generation, setting them up for success, making sure they do better than we did. And one of the ways that, we did that was, with education. And I'm going to jump into there's a question in the chat: does the maternal side of the family pass on family culture more than the paternal side, even if genealogy is not the focus? And I think this is the space I want to answer that. I would say that in my situation, that is true, because I didn't know my dad's side of the family because they were scattered after their mother's birth. And part of them, they were nurtured to, I didn't know they went, they graduated from Hampton Institute. I didn't know they, some of them joined the military, had successful careers. That's on my father's side of the family with some of them. And they really valued education. And my mother's side of the family, they were hard workers, just hard blue collar workers. And consequently, that's what I embraced. But one of the things that I wanted for my nephews and nieces, get your education, because that's something they can never take from you. And I had nephews that I had to really fight with on every year to go back, because they hated the student loan debt. But once they got it, they understood just the reason behind it. I think the last year, the oldest came and said, I finally get what you were trying to tell me. I thought I knew better, but I'm thankful you kept pushing. But that's the takeaway. Make sure you get the things you need. Make sure you remember the family love. Make sure you remember what we're doing here at Highland, and that you embrace it. And so one of them is a council member. The others participate in events that occur there, and they, sit on panels and share their stories. So it's just kind of, and just reinforcing the importance of learning where you come from, learning the stories, helping to make sure they're there for everyone to understand, going forward.
Excellent. Thank you. Hannah.
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone just said. And then I also just want to encourage younger people and to listen, because there was some really interesting drama going on in the past. And there's a lot of really interesting family stories if you're willing to engage and to listen. And history in general, I think a lot of people are uninterested because they think that it's boring or it doesn't relate to them, but there's really nothing new under the sun. And so I think that people should share it, and for younger people to be willing to listen to these stories and maybe even be surprised at the places that they see themselves. People were in all sorts of different types of relationships. People had, there were secrets that aren't so secret. There were queer people in the past. This isn't anything new. And I think that also goes into taking inspiration from these family stories in order to be able to continue these fights for civil rights that we're still really fighting, for people of color, for immigrants, for queer and trans people. These are all still really important things that we're facing, and we can really take inspiration from our ancestors and the things that they did and the ways that they fought for themselves and for their community and for the people around them and for the people that they loved and cared about in their lives. So I think that that's all really critical and things that we need to continue to pass on and to go forward. And I also saw a question in the chat about if there's anyone using technology to keep the younger generation engaged. I personally am not. I am not creative like that in the digital space. But I will say there's a colleague friend on TikTok who goes by at Mag the Historian, Marvin Alonso Greer, who is a reenactor. I think he has quite the TikTok following at this moment, and he also makes Instagram Reels, but he's there sharing stories and sharing information about the past. And I will also use this as a plug for my dad, who does a lot of documentary filmmaking about local history, and I think is doing great work to keep people informed and educated about the history that is in their backyard. And his name is Horace Scruggs, if you didn't know.
And he's also a great musician who will be performing at our in-person Juneteenth celebrations, both on June 17th and June 19th in Orange. So
And June 10th on Saturday
and June 10th on Saturday.
at Highland.
Yes, at Highland. Anyone else? Is anyone else engaging with technology with the younger, the kids?
We're not currently at Menokin, but that's a big initiative that we want to start, like TikToks and Twitch, somehow engaging the younger generation using those platforms, because those are the ones that they're actually paying attention to right now, and somehow making the information bite-sized enough where it's not an overwhelming, it's not like 5 minutes of videos, but maybe a minute to a minute and a half of just information that is key for them to understanding what's going on. So I definitely think those are great avenues to, if you have the time. I know not everyone is creative to use TikTok, but I think those are great avenues to reach the younger generation.
I would just say for one thing we're doing at Montpelier is with our field school, which is where college students from all over the country come to learn archaeology with us. Their final project is that they all have to make a TikTok or a reel of sharing information to their peers. So we're getting hip. Jennifer, did you want to add something?
I just want to say no TikTok here, but we did record oral histories, and we are, they're being archived for the future generations. And I would love to be able to hear my grandmother's voice again. And so that's, that we had that in mind. So when even, the future generations come about, they'll be able to hear my mom's stories and hear some of our stories about our grandparents and our parents. So that's there. So that's a piece of technology that will definitely go on.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, Joanne, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment. I'm finding that a lot of the children today, the younger generation, they're not as interested. The ones I've encountered, they don't want to hear it, And so this one, I'm even with my own children, sometimes they feel like leave the past in the past. So I've seen that a lot. They just don't want to hear it. And some of them have anger, or they just, they're interested in other things. So with me, I have a passion for it. I'm the more I know, the better I feel. But that's me. And it's hard to project my feelings to them, because they just not interested.
Keep the faith because keep the faith because the older they get, the
Who am I
more they'll
talking to?
want to know. I guarantee. So
so.
just keep the faith and keep talking to them.
Yeah.
They're sponges, whether they want to be or not.
Yeah.
So I want to encourage the audience to continue to ask questions in the chat. This has been really great. But so as you all are thinking of your questions, either to raise your hand or add them into the chat. Something I thought about is our session and our theme is about these stories of freedom. So I've been wondering during this conversation what freedom means to you and what you think it would have meant to your grandmother and how those things would have looked sort of the same or different. So I'll let you sort of think about that for a second, but Jennifer, I might go to you first. What does freedom look like to you and what do you think it would have looked like to your grandmother?
This is crazy, but I was sitting down talking to someone about just, just watching I grew up in the 60s, 70s, right? And my grandmother was still very much catering to my grandfather, dinner on the table, cooking, cleaning. And I remember watching that and thinking, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to do it and don't want any part of it. And I think, the freedom, the freedom to just, chart my own course, to make decisions for myself, to not be bound to taking care of a man as my worth. And not that I don't respect it and not that I don't value it. And my grandmother too brought the love and gave the love and, and nurtured the community and our family. And, and I came from a patriarchal family. I mean, that's where I came from, but my grandmother was a force in the middle of that. But I think that freedom for her would have been financial freedom. I think that's one thing that I think she thought about a lot is financial freedom and all that goes with that. And because I never thought of her as not feeling free. She was outspoken. She'd say anything. She challenged. She would and interestingly, while she was keeping this in the house, this role in the house, my grandmother would be sitting on the deacon's bench, and she was a deaconess. She didn't care. She felt this is my spot. This is where I'm going to sit. She would be very outspoken in church meetings. I mean, she would challenge any man. So she wasn't docile and subservient by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that I didn't want to be catering to men. That's what I saw from it. But I think that her financial freedom would have meant more than anything else, because I think it would have gotten her, just probably things she didn't really talk about a lot.
Awesome. Joanne, what do you think? What does freedom mean to you? And what do you think it would have meant to your grandma?
Freedom to me, just being free, that I can vote. I can go into the store. I don't have to go through the back door. I can associate with any nationality without any problems. I haven't encountered anything like that. Not too much. Maybe a few things, but I handled it. So just the idea of being free, that I can serve my country. Just, I don't know. I don't know. Just being free and want to be able to train my children to have respect for others and to be respectful of their elders, as we were to my grandmother and my grandfather and so forth and so on. We showed respect. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. We didn't have to get many spankings because we were trained, they taught us right from wrong. So, and we obeyed. We will go to bed at night. We say our prayers. We say our grace every day. These are things that we were trained. And so to be able to do that now and don't have to be in secret to say my grace or say my prayers, that means a lot to me, you know. And I pray and hope that my lifestyle, I don't dot all my I's and cross on my T's, but what I do, try to treat my fellow man right. I want to pass that on to my children and pray that they do the same thing, you know, just treat others with respect. And so that's what I feel about freedom.
I think that's really, really important. Thank you. Kiana, what does freedom look like to you, and what do you think it would look like to your grandmother?
So I thought about a lot about this question earlier today. I even asked my brother because he's like a couple of years younger than me and a different gender. So I'm like, what do like Black males think about freedom? And I really was thinking about like freedom of thought and expression, being able to like live comfortably. In life. I think really that is what freedom means to me. And I also considered like texting my Nana or my grandma during this call to be like, hey, what does freedom mean to you? But I think that would have been such a strange text to receive at this time. So for them, I really do think is education and financial freedom, like Jennifer was talking about, especially education. That's a big thing they like to talk about when they see me getting all this education. They're like very proud of that. And I think that is what they wish they could have accomplished, but they're so happy that they set my father and my mother up for me and my brother. So.
Absolutely. Hannah, same to you.
Yeah, I think what Jennifer and Joanne and Kiana all said about, you know, my grandmother is still alive. She's 94. Or I have, one living grandmother who's 94, or I guess she'll be 94 this year. Yeah, she'll be 94 this year, which is really incredible. And I think about all the change that she's seen when it comes to freedom and the things that she's able to do and has been able to do in her lifetime and that she wasn't able to do. And I think about that a lot and how that is really, really wild. I'm gonna take it down a little bit, so I'm apologizing in advance. But I also, she called me after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville because I was living down the street when that happened, and she was really sad, of course, and I think a lot of people that live in the area, sort of the fear that came up and sort of expressed that she felt that things were going backwards and that wasn't, we're really not out of the woods yet with this freedom thing. And so even though there has been so much change, there are some things that are still, people's lives are still at risk. There's still not everyone can live freely. And I think to me, freedom is when actually everyone can feel free to and is safe from harm. And we aren't there yet. And that is hard. But I think there are so many people of all ages that are really fighting for that and really want to see a world in where that is the case. I know that there are people who want the opposite, but I think that there are more of us who want the world where that's the case.
I think so. Thank you all so much. To the audience, does anyone else have any questions that they'd want to ask? Feel free to raise your virtual hand. Oh, here we've got one in the chat. Diane asked, did anyone feel there was an unspoken pain, or as Hannah mentioned, fear that their parents or grandparents may have experienced?
If it was definitely unspoken.
Right.
Both of my grandparents were pretty outspoken. And so what I saw of them, they were fierce. And I'm not being a Pollyanna. I just never saw it. I just never saw them. I always saw them, even if there was conflict within the community with neighbors that were, white, there was, my grandfather would walk across and he would make his point and he would walk back and he didn't have a problem doing it. And I saw him do it on more than one occasion. I also saw them come together and nothing had ever happened. It was the willingness to be fearless in that, in that scenario. I'm sure it was there because I've heard my mom talk about how awful it was living through Jim Crow. And my mom just started talking about it. So I'm sure it was there. It just depended on how it manifested. And I just didn't see it in my grandparents. But I sometimes think that I see a certain amount of it with my mom, but I think she used Southern charm and her wits to just rise above it. So.
Okay, thank you. Did anybody else want to answer that question?
My grandmother, only thing I recall of my grandmother is that, like I said before, that she welcomed everybody, black and white, because blacks and whites, and they would come to her house. She would offer them homemade wine, or she baked a lot of 4-layer cakes, coconut and chocolate. Those were her favorite cakes that she would bake, homemade peaches and all that stuff. And she just welcomed everybody, and they would sit on the porch in the swing or in the chair out on the front porch. And I mean, I never heard of any hatred or anger or anything like that. Everybody was welcome. And it went on down to her children, my aunts, my father, my dad. He would cut hair. It didn't matter what color you were. Everybody just got along with everybody. So I didn't see in my family, I didn't see any hatred or any problems as far as being harassed or anything in public or anything like that. So I can't comment on that too much. All I saw was the love that was given. But I'm sure, like Jennifer said, they had their struggles. I'm pretty sure. I know that my uncle, that he was in North Carolina, I think one time, and they drove through, and he had to get gas. He got the gas, which was out front, but he had to go around back to a window and pay for that gas. And I mean, and he did. He did what he was told to do. So those are the memories that I have. Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to thank you all for we're getting to the end of our hour here, but I want to thank you all for sharing so many personal stories. I think this has been really a beautiful conversation. This is one last question, and I think it's a really lovely one to kind of wrap up with. Comes from the chat, and Mike and May Saxton ask, what freedom or freedoms do you hope your grandchildren will have that you do not have to the fullest extent? So I'm going to ask you all to answer that question in 3 words each. So
Generational wealth, and that's 2.
Perfect. Generational wealth, that's 2. And you saved an extra word for the next generation.
Somebody else can use it.
Hannah, what about you?
Oh, 3 words. I think I'll say like freedom from fear.
Amazing.
And of violence is what I'm saying.
Yeah. You took one of Jennifer's words, but that's fine. She shared.
Yeah.
Joanne, what freedoms do you hope your grandchildren would have?
I would have to say the freedom from balance, as same as Hannah said. It's bad times now, a lot of violence, a lot of killing and hate crimes and black on black crimes. And I'm hoping that my children see these things, but they learn from it and not act upon it. Don't just show respect for everybody. So, yeah.
All right, Kiana.
one thing for this question is that the idea of me having grandchildren is so abstract to me that I'm really trying really hard to think of what to say. But definitely this is going to be for being safe and comfortable. That's my big thing. I think like what Hannah was saying, everyone deserves to be, if freedom is not achieved until everyone feels safe. And that is true.
Well, like I said, I just want to thank you all so much. I've really enjoyed this intergenerational cross Virginia conversation. I think it's been really wonderful, and each one of you has been such a wonderful representation of your families, your communities, your knowledge, your schools, and your workplaces. And it's just now all I want is 4-layer cake from Joanne's grandmother. I keep thinking about it. I would like to
homemade
say
wine. And homemade
yes, homemade wine and 4-layer cake, please. But I would like to also say to everyone,
Dandelion wine.
Granddaddy made dandelion wine.
yes, dandelion wine and 4-layer cake. I want to say to everyone on this call, if you enjoyed this, please join us again next week, same time, same place. We will be having a conversation called Stories from Our Community, which is a discussion with local historians and keepers of community history about how Black communities work towards freedom. So I really invite you to come back and join us again next week. Every Thursday in the month of June, we'll be having one of these panels, all of which are going to be recorded, and they're all being put online at OCAAHS.org/Juneteenth. I also invite you all, not this weekend, but next weekend, we are having our in-person celebrations here in Orange. On Saturday, June 17th, we will be celebrating at Montpelier all day. There'll be music, there'll be food, there'll be vendors, there will be all sorts of amazing things. And on Monday, June 19th, we're going to be celebrating in downtown Orange at Church Street Park, which is an amazing commemorative park that we actually had the ribbon cutting on last year at Juneteenth celebration. And Jennifer, I just wanted to give you a moment to talk about the what's happening at Highland tomorrow.
Please come out for our second annual Descendants Day. It starts at 11. Registration is from 11 to 11:30. We are going to be, Hannah's dad is going to be debuting his documentary on our trip to Casabianca, and that's happening at about 11:50. But we're having lots of singing, lots of fellowship, we're going to have Brent Leggs, who is the keynote speaker for us. I'm going to really botch this, but he's a vice president with the for the National Trust for Historical Preservation, and he is wonderful, and he's going to unveil a lot of interesting ideas that he has of surrounding descendants in presidential sites and what we can do to kind of use our platform to amplify the movement and the cause. And we're excited, and lots of free food. Lunch is free, lots of music. Hannah's dad again. And we hope you can come out. And it's until 4 o'clock. So if you can't make it at 11, just come at some point of the day between 11 and 4. We'd love to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
Kiana, do you have anything at Menokin you want to plug?
I would be a bad Menokin person if I didn't plug Makers Day. Is June the 24th, and that's when a bunch of different makers come out. So we have basket weaving, quilt making, and they kind of just demonstrate their skills. So yeah, it's free. You can find it on our website, menokin.org, and you can learn way more about it. So yeah, that's my one big thing for this month.
Awesome.
I will also be at Highland on Saturday, so if you want to see me, come to our table.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. Again, I really appreciate it. This was really wonderful, and I hope to see many of you back here next week talking about stories from our communities. Thank you and have a great night.